This Dvar Torah is generously sponsored by Mindy and Stanley Patchen in memory of their brother Louis Palgan on his first yahrzeit. My natural inclination is to view many things as all or nothing, not one of my best traits. I grew up in a conservative synagogue in Cincinnati, and it started to become egalitarian when I was in kindergarten. Talitot and kippot were expected of everyone who was post-B'nai Mitzvah, but I was never asked to put on tefillin, even though both of my brothers were when they became B'nai Mitzvah. As an adult piecing together my Jewish identity, I never even considered adding tefillin, in part because I had few models of any gender who regularly wrapped leather straps around their arms and foreheads, but my main obstacle was that I didn't pray every day, and I felt strongly that unless I was willing to commit to consistent prayer and tefillin practice, it was inappropriate to take on this mitzvah, all or nothing. My mentality of absolutes deprived me of the chance to dip my toes into a mitzvah and a ritual that has since become so meaningful and essential for me. Binding myself in my grandfather's tefillin, which are worn and soft, while swaddled in my large, cozy talit, gives a physical nature to my prayer that I was missing before. It generates a variety of sensations that actually help me feel closer to God as I betroth myself to God over and over again when I wind the straps through my fingers to form the word Shaddai, one of God's names, on my palm. When my mind wanders as my lips form the words in the Siddur, words that sometimes become rote because they just are repeated over and over again, the bite of the straps on my arms anchors me and brings me back to the kavanah, to the intention behind my prayers. Dressing for prayer in objects made out of animal skin and sinew feels pretty archaic as a way to serve God. Yet in some ways, it's the arcane nature of this ritual that actually adds to its power. On the days that I feel most connected to these physical signs of my relationship with God, I wonder how God experiences my tefillin, if God feels as tied to me as I feel to God. In a related vein, there's a thread of rabbinic literature that debates whether or not God actually needed the sacrifices that God instituted in Vayikra. If God is omnipotent, why would God choose to depend on humans for anything? Surely, God could provide God's own pleasant fragrances and barbecued meat. In his Dvar Torah on Tzav, and linking the parasha to the Haftarah that we would typically read from Yirmiyahu with this parsha, but we didn't read this week because it's Shabbat HaGadol, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg pointed out that there is a reason we are only learning about the sacrifices now in Vayikra and not immediately upon Yetziat Mitzrayim, upon our exodus from Egypt. At that point, God was much more interested in Israel being a people who listened and accompanied God, rather than a people who gave God gifts. Sometimes I read through this part of Vayikra, all these detailed descriptions of sacrifices and priestly garments, and I wonder if I'm capturing God at a moment writing in God's diary, a moment when God realizes something that we have all experienced in our lives, that God has been building towards something, towards a goal for so long, and gets there and then says, now what? God has craved the company of people since Breshit, has been looking for partners and a place to dwell among humanity, and that has finally arrived. Bnei Israel accepted the covenant, they built God a beautiful Mishkan, and God is living among them. But now what? I wonder if God felt lonely. The awareness dawning that achieving this goal did not yield the automatic partnership that God yearned for. The construction of the Mishkan did not mean that God and Bnei Israel were immediately in sync, were immediately at home with one another. God decided that it was not enough for the people to listen and to keep God company, but maybe the missing piece that would bring to fruition God's aspirations is ritual. The sacrifices God introduces in Tzav fills this ritual gap. They are offerings of meat and produce that are meant to be shared meal between God and the people. Some for the flames to lift up to God, and some roasted meat for the people, these mere humans, to eat. Atonement and gratitude bound up in a feast split by the Kadosh Baruch Hu and humanity. Some of the patterns behind the sacrifices that God suggests are reminiscent of the rituals that we use to strengthen our people-to-people relationships. periodic family dinners or date nights or staff bonding excursions. Sporadic points of contact that pop up on occasion to remind everyone that we're still here, we're still in this relationship, and we can still depend on one another. One of God's suggestions is not an occasional or circumstantial occurrence, but an enduring constant, the Eish Tamid. Eish Tamid tukad al hamizbeach lo techbeh. A perpetual fire is to be kept blazing on the altar. It is not to go out. Although the people kindling and fueling the fire may be mortals, the flames themselves were to be eternal. The idea that the fire ought not to go out is repeated 3 times in the space of 5 verses. Ibn Ezra says this repetition is because it's trying to tell us that it really is supposed to be an everlasting flame. Hizkuni takes it another step further and says it's supposed to be lit even when Bnei Israel is traveling. We have traveled a long way since God set up this whole system of sacrifices in the wilderness. Empires have risen and fallen, temples built and destroyed, and with the destruction of that second temple, the flame that was supposed to burn forever was lost. The fire whose warmth was meant to reassure God that through anything, through the generations, we would be in this together, that we would be partners in holding God's metaphoric hands through God's loneliness, that fire was gone. Our religious evolution away from animal sacrifices has yielded many net positives. Prayer is less hierarchical. We have more autonomy. It is much less gory. It's tempting to completely write off the whole sacrificial system as a staple of the past, not something that could possibly be integrated with our modern sensibilities. And maybe God no longer needs the companionship of our fires and is happy with the company of our words and our actions. But what do we lose when daily ritual like stoking the Eish Tamid is missing from our lives? What did I miss out on by waiting even more years past becoming a bat mitzvah before taking on tefillin? When we choose nothing because all is intimidating or feels overwhelming or unattainable, we miss the chance to experience a something that might be magical. The service message of the Eish Tamid can be intimidating. Like 20-something Jessica, you might feel daunted by the prospect of taking on daily or even consistent observance or spiritual practice. It's one thing to go all out cleaning and koshering for Pesach, which only happens once a year and is a holiday so steeped with ritual and tradition. But to keep a kosher home day in and day out, that might feel like too much. The framework of the Eish Tamid also highlights an essential reminder that ritual, like life, is not a zero-sum game. If we rush full steam ahead, our engines, our fires will burn out. The Parsha describes one Kohen, one priest who carefully dresses to make sure the ash doesn't get on his priestly clothing, keeping the Eish Tamid burning through the night and all through the day. But that's impossible. It can't be one person. So the rabbis describe that there's a rotation of priests who take on all of the different roles, collecting firewood and kindling and stoking the flames and staying up to make sure it stays lit. And it was such a sought-after task that people actually entered a lottery to get the part of being the one to care for the Eish Tamid. But while some priests might have had that enthusiasm all the time, I imagine there were days when some of them didn't feel like waking up or just weren't in the mood. Or days when they were more interested in interacting with people who were arriving for the festivals and not doing the mundane behind-the-scenes work. Fortunately, they were part of a collective, part of a large number of priests who were able to step in during those days and share the responsibilities so that the Eish Tamid stayed lit. The Eish Tamid then became a vehicle to cultivate 2 awarenesses in the priests. 1, the knowledge of an ongoing commitment to maintaining a consistent ritual and relationship with God, and 2, the consciousness of their ability to depend on others and be depended upon in order to keep their community and their responsibilities going. In the first mention of this eternal flame, the Torah explains ve'esh hamizbeach tukad bo. Literally, while the fire is on the altar, keep it going on it. However, the last word bo was interpreted by the Sfat Emet to mean inside the priest. The fire had to be maintained inside of the priest. And now, without the temple, without the sacrificial system of Vayikra, we have stepped into the role of those priests. We have become the ones responsible for keeping the Eish Tamid, for fueling that fire, both on the altar of the collective communal experience and also inside of ourselves. The month of Nisan, the month that we're in, was biblically considered the first month of the year. So if we take this opportunity of this new year of sorts to take stock of our spiritual lives, how are you nurturing the Eish Tamid, and how can we support you on that journey? Perhaps a meaningful spiritual practice for you would be regularly attending Cantor Schwartz's Sunday morning Rise and Sing service over Zoom, or humming a nigun to yourself while you're walking. Maybe making a consistent commitment to coming to Minyan, whether once a week or once a month, will help connect you into the rhythm of Jewish life on a random weekday, or could simply be a way for you to support people in mourning who are saying Kaddish. Your Eish Tamid might be best ignited through chesed, through volunteering or helping someone with errands or making a check-in phone call. You could take on a learning project, like our Open Beit Midrash or Jack Grunberg's Parshat HaShavua class, or by learning how to lead a service or perform a new ritual. Whatever your answer is, know that your clergy, that Rabbi Shuck, Rabbi Sitkin, Cantor Schwartz, and I, are here to be part of it. Know that we delight in the phone calls and emails and quick questions after services that ask you to help us, where you ask us to help you better understand something, or how to write a Dvar Torah, or how to try something new. When I started thinking about tefillin, I thought it meant I had to be the sole one responsible to ensure that the Eish Tamid stayed lit. That I had to be willing to put them on every day without fail, or it wasn't valid, wasn't good enough, wasn't true to the tradition that I loved and had inherited. The result is that I missed out on my relationship with the Eish Tamid, in this case with tefillin, for even more time. I hope this season of renewal, as we retrace and count our steps through the wilderness up to Sinai, that you'll join me in the opportunity to reignite our Eish Tamid, our own unique sacred fires, whose flames represent the warmth and intimacy of our relationship with the divine, bringing comfort and closeness not only to us, but to a lonely God yearning for our company. Chag Sameach.